The hearing room was restless, buzzing with side conversations and impatient shuffling of papers, when suddenly the lights dimmed ever so slightly and the screens lit up. What appeared next cut through the chatter like a blade. A grainy clip, tied to Epstein, dark and heavy with implication, filled the chamber. Gasps rippled across the room. Some lawmakers leaned forward in theatrical disbelief, while others exchanged quick glances, their eyes betraying the game at play. This wasn't about evidence. It was about spectacle. Kash Patel sat at the witness table, still and steady, his hands folded. For a moment, his face was unreadable, as if he were studying not the video itself, but the strategy behind it. Cameras clicked furiously. Across the aisle, a smirk curled on the lips of one Democrat, the kind of grin meant to say checkmate. They thought Patel had been cornered, but something shifted. A flicker crossed his eyes-controlled fire, not panic. The room's energy bent toward him. The audience could sense it, though no words had yet been spoken. Every second the video played was a second designed to paint him as complicit by proximity, guilty by suggestion. Yet Patel did not flinch. His stillness was defiance, louder than their theatrics. Reporters whispered. Pens scratched, and the air grew heavier with each passing frame. The smear was unfolding live, a weaponized narrative meant to hang around his neck. The Democrats leaned back in their chairs, comfortable, smug, rehearsed. They believed this was the moment that would break him, reduce him to stammers, to nervous justifications, to silence. And then the video ended. The screen went black, leaving only Patel illuminated beneath the harsh lights. The silence was thunderous. Every eye fixed on him, waiting for collapse, waiting for retreat. Instead, he inhaled slowly, lifted his chin, and let his gaze sweep across the chamber. He was not the cornered man they imagined. He was the challenger who had just been handed their best weapon and was about to turn it back on them. The room braced itself. Because Patel was no longer just a witness, he was a fighter. And his outburst was about to change the tone of the ensign and the headlines across the nation. But what happened next would leave even his fiercest critics stunned too. Understand why this moment mattered. You have to look beyond the four walls of that hearing room. This wasn't just a routine oversight session. It was theater staged for the cameras, carefully choreographed by Democrats who believed they had finally found the perfect weapon to neutralize Kash Patel, by tying his name to the shadows of Epstein. They weren't aiming for policy debate. They were aiming for character assassination, to strip him of credibility in one brutal stroke. But there was more at stake than Patel's reputation. This was about the broader question of how truth is treated in America's halls of power. Do facts matter, or does spectacle win the day? When powerful committees reach for the ugliest associations instead of honest inquiry, it isn't just the witness who suffers. The entire democratic process is dragged through the mud. Patel understood that. That's why he didn't blink. He knew this wasn't only about defending himself. It was about exposing how far the system would go to smear anyone who dared to challenge it. He had seen this play before. Attacks on background, on loyalty, on identity. Every immigrant who has fought their way into public service knows the drill. You're made to prove and reprove your worth, while others are free to coast on unearned authority. The Democrats, sitting high on their dais, thought they held the upper hand. They believed Patel would crumble under the sheer weight of implication. They wanted the American people to see guilt in his silence, shame in his restraint. What they didn't expect was resilience forged in fire a man who had walked through tougher storms and carried scars that made him unshakable in this. 1. And as the seconds ticked by, the stakes only grew higher. The hearing wasn't happening in a vacuum. Every cable channel had cameras pointed squarely at Patel. Social media feeds were already lighting up with clips of the video, captions dripping with outrage and insinuation. The headlines were being written in real time. If Patel stayed quiet, the narrative would calcify against him. If he misspoke, it would be twisted into confirmation. Either way, the smear was designed to stick. That's what made his next move so crucial. He wasn't simply responding to a cheap political stunt. He was standing at the crossroads of narrative warfare, where one sentence could decide whether he would be remembered as a scapegoat or as a fighter who refused to bow. And deep down, Patel knew he couldn't afford to play defense. Defense was exactly what they wanted. An excuse, a stumble. Instead, he would do the unthinkable. He would go on offense. The chamber was about to learn that you don't hand Kash Patel a loaded weapon and expect him to point it at himself. You hand him your own weapon, and he'll find a way to turn it back on you. Because what Kash did next wasn't just a reply. It was a spark that would ignite the entire hearing end shift. The balance of power in a way no one in that room had anticipated. The Democrats hadn't stumbled into this moment by accident. For weeks, whispers had circulated about their plan. Drag Kash Patel into the spotlight and lace his name with scandal through proximity to Epstein. It was a strategy as old as politics itself. When you cannot win the argument, tarnish the man. And in Patel, they saw a target too tempting to resist. They had painted themselves as guardians of morality, defenders of democracy, champions of accountability. But peel back the veneer and another picture emerged, a party all too comfortable weaponizing insinuation. Care to wield shame like a cudgel while ignoring the stains on its own record. Hypocrisy is never subtle in Washington. It struts openly down the marble halls, cloaked in self-righteous speeches. These lawmakers had rehearsed their roles. They would act shocked, lean heavily into the performance of outrage, and pretend to clutch pearls at every frame of the Epstein video. Their eyes would widen for the cameras, their voices would rise in trembling indignation. Yet it wasn't truth they were serving. It was theater carefully scripted, cynically packaged, sold to the public as accountability while reeking of opportunism. Consider the contradictions. Some of the very figures wagging their fingers at Patel had themselves dodged questions about campaign donors, lobbyist ties, or late-night fundraisers and backrooms dripping with influence. Their outrage wasn't rooted in morality, but in convenience. Patel represented a threat, a truth-teller, too unpolished to play their game, too relentless to be absorbed into their machinery. And for that, he had to be discredited. Behind the smirks and dramatic pauses, there was calculation. They believed they could break him not with facts, but with association. They knew the power of a name like Epstein, the way it poisoned everything it touched. Drop Patel's name in the same sentence, and suddenly the nuance vanished. Guilt by proximity. Guilt by suggestion. In an age of headlines read faster than stories, suggestion was enough. And yet their arrogance blinded them. They mistook Patel for the same kind of cautious Washington operator who would melt under pressure, who would try to appease the committee by distancing himself from shadows he never touched. They misread his silence as weakness, not strategy. They saw an immigrant son and assumed pliability. They saw calmness and mistook it for fragility. But arrogance always overplays its hand. The Democrats were too busy congratulating themselves on their clever stunt to see the cracks forming in their own performance. Their outrage looked too rehearsed, their indignation too polished. Even in the chamber, a few journalists raised skeptical eyebrows. Was this really about justice? Or was it a show designed to score points at Patel's expense? And therein lay the villainy. Not in disagreement over policy, not in tough questioning, but in the willingness to weaponize the darkest chapters of American scandal, simply to smear a man who dared to stand apart from their narrative. The same voices claiming to defend democracy were comfortable bending truth, distorting implication, and turning hearings into circus acts. For them, this was about winning the news cycle, not uncovering facts. For Patel, it was about survival not of his reputation alone, but of the principle that truth should not be drowned out by performance. The Democrats thought they had cornered him. They thought Patel would sit in that chair, stumble through denials, and leave with a shadow that could never be scrubbed clean. They thought the fight was already won, but they were wrong. Because Patel wasn't the kind of man who carried silence like a burden. He carried it like a weapon, waiting for the precise moment to strike back. And their arrogance, their miscalculation, their smug certainty, that would become the opening he needed. They believed they had written the script. What they didn't know was that Patel was about to seize the pen, rip the pages, and write his own. They thought Patel would shrink back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. To understand why Kash Patel sat so unflinching in that chair, you have to trace the road that brought him there. His story doesn't begin in Washington's marble halls, but in the quiet determination of immigrant parents who believed that if you worked hard enough, truth and dignity could carve out a place even in the most unforgiving of systems. Patel grew up watching his family navigate a country that promised opportunity but demanded resilience. He knew what it meant to prove yourself twice over, once for your skills and again for your identity. Where others inherited privilege, he inherited grit. That difference became his armor. It was forged in classrooms where he was underestimated, in workplaces where he was dismissed, and in every room where his name and face set him apart before he ever spoke a word. He chose the path of public. As a prosecutor, as a national security official, as an investigator, Patel earned his reputation the hard way by confronting corruption, by refusing to bend to pressure, by carrying truth even when it was unpopular. Every battle left scars, but it also left him sharper, less willing to flinch when the stakes were high. That history was alive in the hearing room. When Democrats rolled their theatrics onto the screen, Patel wasn't just a man under attack. He was the son who had promised his parents that integrity would always anchor him. He was the official who had walked into countless storms before and refused to bow. He was the immigrant's child who understood that when power tries to smear you, silence is not surrender, is the pause before a counterstrike, and Patel had counterstruck before. In investigations that reached the highest levels of government, he had uncovered secrets others wanted buried. He had been labeled, targeted, dismissed, and yet he had always risen with the same quiet resilience. That track record wasn't an accident. It was the result of a man who had learned that when you face arrogance, you don't match its noise. You outlast it with calm strength until the noise crumbles on its own. Sitting there beneath the searing lights, Patel wasn't rattled because he knew the playbook. He had seen politicians inflate outrage for cameras. He had watched committees disguise spectacle as substance, and he had long understood that in Washington, truth is often the first casualty. That was why he never confused composure with weakness. His calm was discipline. His silence was strategy. To millions of viewers watching from home, Patel's story resonated, even if they didn't know all the details. They saw in him the echoes of their own families, the father who worked nights without complaint, the mother who endured prejudice with dignity, the immigrant who fought for a voice in rooms that were never designed for them. His posture at that table wasn't just his own. It carried the weight of every outsider who had ever been told to sit quietly and accept the narrative handed to. It was a clash between arrogance and dignity, between the smug theatrics of the powerful and the grounded resilience of someone who had clawed his way into the arena. Patel's stillness wasn't silence. It was defiance. His restraint wasn't fear. It was the confidence of a man who knew that every insult hurled at him would ultimately rebound on those who threw it. And while the Democrats smirked and congratulated themselves on their performance, Patel's story was quietly reshaping the battlefield. Because when a man like him rises from immigrant roots to face down the full weight of a political smear, he doesn't just defend himself, he becomes a symbol for everyone watching who's been underestimated, overlooked, or unfairly maligned. That symbol was alive in the air of the hearing room. Even if the lawmakers couldn't see it, they thought they were fighting one man. In truth, they were fighting a story far bigger than him, a story of resilience, of sacrifice, of refusing to bend when the system pushes hardest. And that story was about to collide with the ugliest attack of Patel's career. The Democrats had their stage set, their cameras rolling, their smear rehearsed, but Patel had something they had overlooked. A lifetime of battles that had prepared him for this very moment. And as his eyes lifted to meet theirs, steady and unflinching, the room could feel it. Something was coming. Something that would flip the script and remind everyone that dignity, when tested, does not break. The quiet before his response was not surrender. It was the tightening of the bowstring before release, and when he finally spoke, the chamber would never be the same. The silence shattered with the chairman's voice, sharp and deliberate, asking Patel to respond. The Democrats leaned forward, their pens ready, eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was the trap they had laid. They were certain the witness was about to stumble into it. Patel's first words were measured, steady, almost to calm. He acknowledged the clip, dismissed the insinuation, and redirected toward the substance of the hearing. But his refusal to play their game only seemed to irritate them further. They wanted a slip, an overreaction, a denial they could twist into guilt. His composure felt like defiance, and arrogance does not tolerate defiance well. The volume rose. One Democrat interrupted mid-sentence, cutting him off with exaggerated exasperation. Another jabbed a finger toward him, as if sheer performance could substitute for evidence. Their voices overlapped, feeding off each other, turning the hearing into a spectacle. Theatrics replaced inquiry, and the chamber began to feel less like a place of governance and more like a stage. Patel, however, did not rise to meet their fury. His voice remained level, his gaze unwavering. He reminded them that their job was oversight, not character assassination. His restraint was surgical, his tone steady. Yet it was exactly that steadiness that rattled them. Because for every insult hurled, every insinuation leveled, Patel refused to flinch. The contrast grew sharper by the second. On one side of the table, polished outrage, furrowed brows, and dramatic pauses. On the other, a man who sat with the stillness of a mountain, unshaken by the storm swirling around him. Cameras captured every detail, the beads of sweat forming on the brows of his interrogators, the subtle shifts of unease in their chairs. The way Patel's calmness made their anger look like desperation. The tension thickened, heavy and electric. Viewers at home could feel it through their screens, the imbalance between arrogance and dignity, between noise and clarity. Every time Patel paused, the silence screamed louder than their accusations. Every time he spoke, he cut through their performance with words that refused to bend, and then the insults escalated. One Democrat voice, trembling with manufactured rage, accused Patel of aiding corruption itself, of standing shoulder to shoulder with predators and liars. The words hung in the air, poisonous and deliberate. Gasps echoed faintly from the gallery. This was no longer questioning. This was an attack. Patel leaned forward at last, his hands clasped, his eyes locked on his accusers. The composure remained, but now it carried an edge, a quiet intensity that signaled the turning of the tide. He didn't need to raise his voice. The shift in his posture alone told the room that the patience was ending, the bowstring fully drawn. The Democrats had pushed him to the edge, certain they were forcing him toward collapse. But in truth, they had only sharpened his resolve. The clash had reached its breaking point, and what followed would no longer be restraint, because Patel was ready. And what came out of his mouth next would not just be a defense, it would be a counterattack so precise, so devastating that the chamber itself would fall silent in its wake. The room braced, though no one knew it yet. Patel was about to deliver the moment that would redefine the hearing, and then, with a calm inhale, he began. Patel's voice cut through the chamber like steel wrapped in velvet, steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of both outrage and restraint. "You can play all the videos you want," he began, his eyes fixed on the row of Democrats, "but you can't rewrite truth with theatrics." The words landed heavy. The Democrats shifted in their seats, some feigning disinterest, others tightening their jaws. Patel leaned in, his tone sharpening. "If this hearing was about justice, you'd ask real questions. Instead, you play clips meant to smear, not to clarify. That's not oversight. That's performance. And the American people know the difference." A ripple passed through the gallery. Journalists glanced up from their notepads. Cameras zoomed closer. Patel had chosen not to dodge the attack, but to drag it into the light, naming it for what it was. He paused, letting the silence do its work. The moment stretched. Every second dared his accusers to interrupt. No one moved. Then he struck again. "You want to talk about corruption? Let's talk about how this committee cherry-picks narratives to distract from its own failures. You invoke Epstein to score headlines, but you stay silent on the powerful names in your own orbit who were closer to him than I ever was. Hypocrisy doesn't disappear because you shout louder, it just becomes more obvious." The smug expressions on the dais faltered. A cough here, a shifting glance there. The confidence that had filled the room minutes earlier began to crack. Patel's tone grew sharper, more personal. "Do you know what it's like," he asked, voice steady, "to work your whole life to serve this country, only to have your name dragged through filth by people who confuse accusation with fact? My parents came here believing America rewards integrity, and you sit here weaponizing scandal against their son because you think it makes good television." Gasps broke the tension. A few spectators nodded quietly, moved by the turn. Patel had shifted the ground beneath the Democrats' feet. What they framed as an attack now sounded like bullying, and his immigrant story reframed him as the underdog fighting against the entitled elite. One Democrat attempted to cut in, voice raised. "Mr. Patel, this is not about your parents." But Patel overrode him. Louder now, though still controlled. "No, it's exactly about them. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every family that believes truth should outlast lies. It's about every immigrant who's told they don't belong. Every servant of the public who's smeared because they won't play politics as usual. You think I'm the one on trial here? But it's your arrogance, your abuse of power. It's on trial today." The chamber erupted not in applause, but in whispers, gasps, hurried typing on phones. Clips of this exchange would race across Twitter within minutes. The committee had tried to corner him, but Patel had turned the lens back on them, transforming himself from the accused into the accuser. His voice lowered again, drawing the room closer. "You can drag my name through the mud all day, but when the dust settles, what matters is not the smear you tried to stage. What matters is that you revealed exactly who you are. Politicians more interested in theater than truth, more invested in headlines than justice." Another pause. The silence was deafening. The Democrats stared, some tight-lipped, some visibly rattled. For the first time all day, Patel controlled the tempo, and then came the line that would live on in clips, memes, and late-night monologues. "So go ahead, play your videos, throw your smears. But remember this, I've faced down terrorists, criminals, and corruption at the highest levels. If you think a grainy clip and a few cheap accusations will make me back down, you don't know me, and you don't know the people I stand for." The words hit like a hammer. The chamber fell into a stunned hush. One journalist later described it as the moment the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Patel sat back, his gaze unwavering, his silence now louder than any accusation. Across the dais, Democrats exchanged nervous glances. The performance they had scripted had slipped out of their control. The witness they thought would cower had instead rewritten the scene. Exposing their ploy as shallow and self-serving, the chairman cleared his throat, attempting to steer the hearing back to order. But the energy had shifted. Patel had seized it, and no procedural reminder could put it back in their hands. The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones lit up with alerts as sound bites already began circulating. The hashtag war had begun in real time, and Patel's defiance was the opening volley. He had not raised his voice to a shout. He had not slammed his fists. He had simply spoken with conviction, slicing through the noise with truth sharpened by years of service and sacrifice. And in doing so, he had left his opponents scrambling. The Democrats thought they were delivering a knockout blow. Instead, they found themselves staring at the man still standing. Stronger than before, his words reverberating far beyond the chamber walls. The hearing adjourned moments later. But no one in that room believed the story was over. The battle had only shifted arenas. The fight was about to explode into the court of public opinion. And as Patel rose from his seat, the stunned silence of his opponent said it all. The weapon they had forged to destroy him had just detonated in their own hands, but the shockwaves were only beginning to spread. The moment Patel's words hit the airwaves, the ripple effect was instant. Within minutes, clips of his counterattack were ricocheting across social media, each one framed with captions that captured the raw electricity of the exchange. Patel destroys smear campaign, Dems silenced by their own stunt, truth greater than theater, on Twitter. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag Kash Patel trended within the hour, climbing alongside hashtag hearing gone wrong and hashtag mic drop moment. TikTok stitched the highlights into rapid-fire edits, pairing Patel's calm defiance with cinematic music, turning his lines into rallying cries. Instagram Reels spread his final words, "You don't know me. And you don't know the people I stand for," as if they were scripture. Reposted by accounts far outside the usual political circles, cable news scrambled to keep pace. Some anchors framed the outburst as a masterclass in political survival. Others clutched at the narrative of disrespect to the committee. But even those critical segments couldn't escape the magnetism of Patel's performance. The raw footage played on loop, each replay giving his words more reach, more resonance. And then came the validation layer, the voices of ordinary people. Veterans posted messages of solidarity. Finally, someone stood up without fear. Immigrant families shared stories online of feeling silenced, then drew parallels to Patel's composure. One viral post read, "Watching him hold his ground felt like watching my father defend his dignity at work. Calm, steady, unbreakable, even."
Ow.
Celebrities dipped into the fray. A comedian tweeted, "Dems brought a knife to a gunfight. Patel brought poetry." A musician posted Patel's speech over a soaring instrumental, calling it a soundtrack for standing tall. Suddenly, Patel wasn't just a figure in a hearing, he was a symbol of defiance against political arrogance. Meanwhile, the Democrats who had staged the smear began to feel the backlash. Clips of their smug expressions during the Epstein video now circulated with mocking captions. "When you realize you just played yourself," memes compared there. Confidence at the start of the hearing with their uneasy faces after Patel's speech. The before and after contrast, too delicious for the internet to resist. For Patel, the shift was clear. He had walked into the chamber as a witness under fire. He walked out a hero to millions who saw in his story their own fight for dignity. The spectacle meant to break him had instead elevated him, turning his restraint and defiance into the stuff of legend, and Washington felt it too. Columnists wrote of a seismic moment, one that revealed how overplaying theatrics could backfire spectacularly. Some Democrats privately admitted the stunt had landed wrong. Others doubled down. But the defensive tone only made them look smaller against Patel's towering composure. The shockwaves were not just digital. They were cultural. Patel's moment had transcended the hearing room and seeped into living rooms, classrooms, coffee shops. It became the conversation at dinner tables and in break rooms. Not about Epstein, not about scandal, but about how one man refused to be humiliated by a rigged stage, and beneath the noise, one truth stood firm. The attempt to silence him had amplified him. The smear had collapsed under its own arrogance. But beyond the memes and headlines, beyond the trending tags and viral edits, this clash carried a deeper lesson, one that couldn't be reduced to clips or commentary. Because Patel's fight was no longer just about surviving a hearing. It was about redefining what dignity looks like when arrogance tries to crush it, and that lesson was about to unfold in full when the echoes of that hearing faded and the cameras moved on. Something larger remained. Kash Patel's outburst wasn't remembered as a moment of rage. It was remembered as a moment of reclamation. A reclamation of dignity, of truth, of the right to stand in one's own story without letting it be rewritten by arrogance. What the Democrats had tried to do was simple: trap Patel in a spectacle of shame. But what Patel had done was something far greater. He flipped the script. He refused to let his identity be weaponized. He refused to let his family's sacrifices, his service, and his integrity be reduced to a smear. In that refusal, millions saw a mirror of their own battles. This is why the moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't just Patel's words, it was the posture, the calm steadiness, the refusal to play the game of insult for insult. He didn't out-yell his opponents. He outlasted them with composure. He didn't trade humiliation for humiliation. He exposed arrogance by simply holding his ground. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching of a universal truth. Dignity is louder than hate for immigrant families. His calm defiance carried generational weight. Many saw in him the same quiet strength their parents carried when they worked double shifts, endured prejudice, or were underestimated in classrooms and offices. His performance was more than political, it was cultural. It was proof that calm strength, even in the most hostile room, could outshine the theatrics of power, and the morals stretched beyond Patel himself. This wasn't just about one man standing up in a congressional chamber. It was about what happens when ordinary people refuse to bow to unfairness. It was about what happens when truth is spoken not with fury, but with conviction. Because in the end, theatrics fade. Smear campaigns collapse. Headlines move on. But dignity, the kind Patel carried that day, outlasts it all. It plants itself in memory. It spreads through stories. It inspires the next act of courage. The lesson was clear: when arrogance tries to silence, it often ends up amplifying the very voice it sought to erase. When corruption wields spectacle as a weapon, it reveals its own weakness. And when truth is carried with dignity, it becomes unstoppable. This is the heartbeat of Patel's moment. The reason why it leapt from a committee room into a cultural memory, it wasn't just political drama. It was moral theater, the message that transcends party lines. And so, as the dust settled, the true victory wasn't measured in sound bites or trending hashtags. It was measured in the countless people who walked away from that moment feeling seen, feeling validated, feeling reminded that they, too, could stand tall when arrogance tried to push them down. The hearing that was meant to break Patel became the hearing that built a movement of respect for dignity itself. But even as this moral clarity emerged, one final note remained: the call, not just to witness, but to act. Because history is not written by the noise of arrogance. It is written by the calm voices that refuse to be silenced. And Patel's voice, steady and unshaken, had just joined that lineage. But the story does not end here. Because every movement needs its chorus. Every act of courage demands a response. And the question that lingers, the question that Patel's moment leaves us with, is this: will we echo his dignity with our own actions? Or will we allow arrogance to dominate the mic? That choice, the one left in our hands, is where the real story begins. This was the headline moment. Kash Patel, live Kash Patel outburst, as Dems play his shock Epstein video in House hearing. But what it became was so much bigger than a headline. It became proof that dignity does not bow to arrogance. That truth can outlast even the dirtiest smear campaign. And that calm strength can shake the very foundations of corruption. Think about what you just witnessed. A man who walked into a chamber stacked against him, confronted with the ugliest tactic politics has to offer. A video meant to humiliate him, a narrative designed to erase him. And yet he did not crumble. He did not flinch. He turned their weapon into his platform, their spectacle into his story, their attempt to silence him into his loudest and most unforgettable stand. And here's the part that matters most. This wasn't just about Patel. It was about us. About every person who has ever been underestimated, every family that has ever felt dismissed, and every voice that has ever been told it doesn't belong. His calm defiance was not only his victory, it was ours, but now comes the choice. Do we let this moment fade into the scroll of yesterday's headlines? Or do we carry it forward, share it, echo it, and make sure that truth is never drowned out by arrogance again? If you believe dignity deserves the mic, share this story. If you believe calm strength always defeats noise, subscribe and join a movement where those values are celebrated, defended, and amplified. Because history is watching, and so are we. And together, we decide whose voice will carry forward.